Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You are here for the second session of Post-Pandemic Fuel for Growth. Today, we're going to be talking about forward momentum. If you happen to miss our last webinar, that's okay. We've got plenty of things to talk about today, and you won't have missed any of the content. We'll catch you up. You'll know what we're talking about. So today we're talking about reviewing the frame, and we're going to focus on the right work. We talked a little bit about that last time, but today we're gonna really look into SMART goals with a brand new lens. And then we're gonna also visit forward momentum and talk about quadrant mapping and small test to scale efforts. Thank you for being here. And the very first thing that we want to do is to see how you're feeling. We did this last time, but we want to check in with you again. So we've got a poll for you to answer, and I'll give a moment or two for that to pop up. Excellent there. Well, that is a positive sign, isn't it? In showing that most of you have a pretty full tank. A few of you might need just a little more time to get it up to speed for that, but for the full tank, but I know that you'll get there. I can't believe that summer is already winding down and that we are ready for this next school year. It's an exciting time, isn't it? And one of the things that I know that you're going to be focusing on is this. It's that planning cycle. Do you remember this from the last webinar? We talked about how planning is really simple, right? We know that it takes way more than just following this formula here, and if only it were this simple. But because we're working with children, working with people, it's a little more complex than that. We have work to do with planning. You know that there has been a public outcry about learning loss, and everyone is worried about that. So when we start school this fall, it can't be business as usual. The world is watching to see how we're going to serve students and close that achievement gap. How do we know which path to take? These are really tough times as school leaders, but you know, there's some good news out there. We can do it. We can redesign equitable teaching and learning where students can thrive. I'm Lesli Laughter, and I am the Chief Academic Officer at 806 Technologies, but more importantly, I'm an educator. 806 Tech's vision is to create a world of innovative schools through responsive software and processes. So we work hard at having amazing software for improvement planning, federal programs, and support translations, English learners, and we also provide great professional development for needs assessment training and strategic planning and other types of professional development. You can find out more about us on our website.
And I'm Matt Pope, and I'm honored to be here with our amazing partner, Lesli and 806 Technologies. Ether Alliance is a nonprofit based in Austin, Texas, where we serve students what we call cradle to career. When students are born, how do they receive the best education to be kinder ready all the way to the pipeline of high school, college, career success? Our mission is to transform education systems through data and collaboration so all students succeed. And that all students is critical to our mission because we believe in equity and want to move equity forward, not just here in Texas, but across the nation. But once again, we're honored to be here with our amazing partner, 806 Technologies.
Thank you, Matt. You know, as school starts, I know many of us are feeling that we would like to return to normal, whatever that is. But if we think about school prior to COVID, is that really what our students need? So much has changed around us and life is very different. So does it make sense to go back? Our students deserve the very best education possible. They're really resilient, but they need our help. And today we're going to build upon what we learned about in our first webinar. When we see success and progress in schools, it's where principals and teachers have been very proactive and creative in how they meet the needs of their students. What's underneath all of this, regardless of whether it's face-to-face or online, is the importance of people and those personal connections. Education is really a labor intensive industry, and it's a matter of how we personalize the learning experience to meet our students' needs, how we notice and provide supports and help our learners that are struggling.
Yeah, Leslie, and in the chaos of the last 16 months with COVID, it's understandable that some educators have lost sight of the focus because they're trying to keep up with last year remote teaching, cycling kids in and out and cleaning before they come in, and masks now as a school supply, and just the fear of catching the virus and getting sick themselves. And then you have all the world things happening with toilet paper shortages and just the world stopping for a second. It's just a little chaotic, and oh my, I know now why the focus can sometimes become a little blurry. But even after the last 16 months, when our brain is struggling to keep up, you could easily be overwhelmed. But that's when things fall apart. That's why you must frame, focus, and move forward. We have to make schools and systems more inclusive, compensate for inequality, and find new ways to extend learning or accelerate learning, which is a new word we're hearing across every facet of our work right now, is accelerate learning, especially if you're here in the state of Texas, where there's a new law about accelerating learning that schools are currently working on how to navigate and implement this school year. Our webinar started back in April, focusing on framing team mindset, focusing on the right work, and we left forward momentum for part 2, but we're gonna go back and go over frame team mindset again. And then Leslie's gonna dig into focus on the right work a little deeper, and then we'll share how to move the work forward. I had a conversation with the superintendent yesterday, and going back to Leslie's question about, can we go back and can we just do the same? Is that the world we live in? And the superintendent said something yesterday. She said, we have to be willing to take on new stuff, but we have to be more willing to get rid of old stuff that doesn't work. And that's the critical thing that we don't tend to do in education quite well. We tend to try to frame, focus, and do forward momentum on everything, and we don't do anything really well, or we can't mobilize everyone to doing everything well. And the first step we do that, and how we do that, is through framing team mindset. I'm just gonna refresh how we frame team mindset and recap what we talked about at the last webinar about how to frame mindset. Mindset is all about what people believe, and beliefs drive action. So in order to address all attitudes, we have to think of assets that exist in our current reality with our current team. Leslie mentioned that education is a human job. So we have to support, develop, and grow humans. And we do that by focusing on their mindset. And one of the tools to focus on mindset is thinking through what we can control, what we can influence, and what we have no control over. We tend to sometimes spend too much time on things we can't control. And one of my professors in graduate school said, we spend too much time chasing rabbits. And he would do this little hand signal about chasing rabbits. And he said, Matt, are we chasing rabbits? And then we'd get back focused on what can we control and what can we influence? Because the things that we're chasing that we have no control over are things that are just taking up time and space, but they're not moving learning and success forward for students. So think about this. What are things that you can control and you can influence? And if you just want to add a few of those to the chat, and let's think through what are some things we can control. And there's some examples on the diagram on the screen. Relationships are critical, what we've learned over the last 16 months, because you have to have connections before content. When you deal with humans, you've got to capture their heart before you can capture their head, which is a famous quote from Flip Flippin from Capturing Kids' Hearts. But before we dig into forward or focusing on the right work, I want to just pause and have you think about this. The plans you are implementing now perfectly align with the results you are achieving. So how do we get different results? We have to change the plan. We have to change the focus, and we have to do different work to get different results. We can't just keep grinding ahead thinking that doing the same thing is going to get us different results. As Leslie's talking about the next section of really focusing on the right work, think about what might be in your plan that might not be the right work. Leslie?
Thank you, Matt. So what does it really mean to focus on the right work? Well, focusing on the right work creates clarity and it promotes growth. The right work is going to point us towards the vision, and that's what it's all about. It's that constant movement towards the vision of our school, and that vision is about what we want school to be like when all the conditions are right. When everything is in place, what will school look like? So by focusing that direction, it opens up the view and helps strategies and processes and beliefs fall into alignment. But it takes a lot of work to do that. It doesn't just happen naturally. Just creating a plan in isolation or by itself is not enough. It's having those processes in place where you can actually implement with a focus. And that has to be done by design, not by chance. And to do that, you have to be involved with people, with authentic collaboration and with understanding, with them understanding that that planning process is not about compliance, although we definitely want to be compliant. It goes beyond that. It's all about what is the right thing to do. And the thing that we need to remember about creating this focus is that people are naturally going to focus somewhere. So as leaders, we need to be proactive enough about shaping a clear focus for them. So leaders have to focus by design instead of letting things happen by chance. With the reopening of our schools, leaders need to be crystal clear about what students need and about what teaching and learning must look like. It's always been important for leaders to see the big picture, but now more than ever, leaders need to ensure that teachers have that same view. In order to accelerate learning, teachers not only have to know and understand their standards and what needs to happen in their classroom at their grade level in their subject, but they also have to look beyond that. They're going to have a clear vision of what was taught prior to students coming to their classroom. So they need to know those standards prior to today, and they need to know those standards after those students leave. So this year, more than ever, it's that vertical alignment, that piece that teachers are going to have to understand if we're going to be able to accelerate and move students forward. Learning is going to have to be chunked and prioritized. And the only way that can be done is if everyone has a clear picture of that, the big picture of what students need across time. I know that you have seen the SMART acronym. We've talked about SMART for years. And for clarity, many schools use the SMART acronym to write their goals. And we want that to continue because SMART goals are good and they should be used everywhere. However, in a post-COVID school, simply setting SMART goals won't be enough. It's not going to get us to where we want to be. And we can't just develop goals and expect things to happen. So what we're going to need to do is to expand this a little bit. And instead of just working on SMART goals, we want to be smarter about it. And we're going to add 2 more letters onto the end of that SMART acronym to help us get into the doing part. The E stands for evaluating, and not just evaluating, but evaluating the impact of what we're doing. Because at the end of the day, it's all about what happens with student achievement and student learning. That's the impact that we want to focus on. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. The R stands for reviewing, because never before has it been more important for us to not only implement the best instruction that we can, but to turn around and evaluate how that instruction is impacting our students and how we are able to accomplish what we're doing. Because if we don't do that, then we may be missing opportunities with students. It's going to be very different when they come back to school because of the learning loss. And so evaluating the impact and having good reviews along the way are going to be critical to a school's growth. So evaluating and adding that ER to a goal moves it from being just an event into something that we can call the way we do business in school. It's very purposeful, it's focused, and it causes it to move as the school year progresses. When we not only plan and implement, but then we stop and check our progress, then we can modify along the way and make sure that what we are doing stays aligned with what we need. Reviewing that progress is so important, and because things are so uncertain, reviewing that progress in a 90-day cycle will be something that will be extremely beneficial. Let's pretend for just a moment that these two data findings are significant in our school. We'll pretend that we are leaders in a certain school, and these two findings have become very relevant, and we want to write goals for improvement. This first piece in the first bullet here is a pretty typical goal at measuring progress. It says that our students' math scores have fallen, and we're looking at particular groups of students here, and our goal is we want those math scores to be better, not only for all students, but we're going to especially look at our economically disadvantaged group. The second goal here from the data findings is a process goal. And these are harder to write, but they still can be written, and they can be written in a smart format. So let's take a look at how we might want to do that. Here is our first goal again. And to add this to the smarter piece with the ER, we want to talk about the E first in evaluating the impact. So at the end of the year, when we're looking at those math scores and we're looking for growth, the evaluating the impact will of course be measuring that success to see if we got there. But we want to take that a step farther. We want to look at the impact on student learning and how are we going to measure that? So as we're setting this goal at the beginning of the year, we want to think through to the very end and anticipate from the beginning how we will know that this has had a good impact on students. How are we going to measure that? How can that information impact future instruction? How will we take this and build upon where we currently are? And that last bullet there that's in blue is so important for this year because that's a focus on acceleration. How can evaluating at the end of the year contribute to accelerated learning? So you can see that by looking at this goal, we're almost looking at the end, and that could be past the time of instruction for this school year. So that piece alone is not going to get us where we need to be. We have to have that R in there as well in order to get the full picture. So when we're looking at the R, which is reviewing it, we want to have that constant monitoring along the path. We know where we are starting, we know where we want to end, but what's going to happen along the way? And that's what the R is for. We're reviewing. It's that constant monitoring piece. Formally in 90-day cycles, but informally, we want to monitor in even shorter cycles. And that gets down into the classroom and how teachers are monitoring on a daily basis as students are being introduced to instruction and working through the instructional pieces. So how do we know along the way that progress is on track? We need to establish that time where we are going to stop and evaluate the progress. And up front from the very beginning, we need to determine how far we think we can go in the first 90 days, and then how far we think we can go in the next 90 days. And we need to talk up front about how we are going to adjust our instruction and our actions when we see that we're not on track. That's how we're going to get this whole piece moving forward. process goals are specifically written to change adult behavior. So let's take a look at this progress goal where it says throughout 2021-2022, all teachers will demonstrate mathematical practices in their own content areas by weaving at least one math concept per week into their instruction. So this is a process goal to help this school accelerate. The E in this SMARTER takes us beyond the face value of the goal. That's the evaluation. How will we know what success looks like and what impact we expect to happen? So here, it might be that teachers and students are interpreting graphs across different disciplines, or maybe interpreting some trends that they're seeing in data from a certain classroom. They might be sorting and analyzing information and then identifying patterns and relationships. So as we build this goal, we also want to create the models that tell us exactly what success looks like. We don't want to make people guess or assume. So we want to plan a very straight path from where we are up to that first 90 days and identify exactly what we want to see in those classrooms so that teachers know if they are going to be on track to meet that end goal. We think ahead about anticipated results and desired impact. And then as we get to those and we stop and measure, we determine, are they strong enough? Are they moving us as far down the path as we want? And are they getting us where we want to be? If not, then those reviews are the time when we want to adjust and monitor and strengthen what we're doing. You can go out on Google and do a search on 90-day goals, and your screen is just going to be flooded with articles. 90-day goals have become very popular, and there's several reasons for that. First, 90-day goals create a very focused action. And in schools, we are so busy. There is such activity all the time, and leaders are being pulled in many, many directions. So a 90-day goal is easier to focus and manage than a year-long goal. So that's one of the reasons why we want to break that up into chunks. Plus, when we're working on something as important as student achievement, we can't afford to wait to the end of the year to find out that a strategy isn't working. We can't just set that goal about how much students are going to gain on the state assessment, because that waits till it's too late. The 90-day goal gives us smaller chunks, and it also creates a healthy pressure. And often this kind of pressure creates and breeds new ideas. Without a sense of urgency, every day could be the same, and growth doesn't often happen in that kind of environment. But by having that 90-day chunk, there's a little bit of pressure there to get to a certain point. Another advantage is that 90-day goals collapse timeframes for us. It is proven that people achieve goals and acquire new skills faster when they have quarterly goals as compared to the year-long ones. And because we're coming out of COVID, doesn't it make sense that we want to collapse and compact as much as we possibly can so that we can accelerate student learning and achievement? That just makes sense. So what does it look like to write smarter? It doesn't all have to be in one sentence. And in fact, it may be better that it is split out into two parts. The important thing is to plan it all the way through from the very beginning. Just like you're planning for a vacation. If your goal is to go to Disneyland, you don't set the goal of going to Disneyland and you just stop. For a successful trip, you set the goal of going to Disneyland, and then you think each step through all the way to the end. You talk about the traveling, you talk about the packing, you talk about every day on your vacation so that you have all the pieces in place that for the right times. We want to do the same thing with our smarter goals. We start at the beginning, we think about the very end where we want to be, and then we're going to think about each step along the way. So that's why both the E and the R are important in building your goals, and in that order. You want to think about the end goal, where where we want to be before we start talking about those chunks along the way. Without the E and the R in your goal is going to be incomplete. Another reason why it makes sense to use smarter goals is that often if we just have a SMART goal without that evaluation piece, without thinking about the impact, and without the reviews along the way, our goals get very isolated from the why. And that is the answer to everything, the why. Why are we here? Why are we providing this instruction for students? Why do we want them to learn these things? Achievement without the why is short-lived. And that's another proven fact. When you're setting your own personal goals or whether it's at school, achievement without the why is often short-lived. It's the same thing as studying for the test and then forgetting everything 3 days later. So Matt, let's stop for just a moment and talk about this. In going back to what you were saying earlier, why is it important to have a positive mindset when you're working with planning and working with schools?
Well, I think a few points, Leslie, you brought up was about the why from Simon Sinek, but also how are we going to motivate people to a year-long goal that we're going to track every 90 days if we're not connected to it, or if we don't feel like anything is possible, or we don't believe that we can do it or we can achieve it. So a lot of times we write a lot of goals and forget the culture part of really moving progress forward. And that's really what framing team mindset is. It's culture work. And that's really, you know, they say culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Well, that's true when you try to implement goals and improvement plans. If we haven't addressed the culture is going to win every time. And all of those improvement efforts are going to not get the results. And we're going to get the results we've always been getting.
Exactly, Matt. You are so right. And you said a very key word too in talking about team. So when we are planning and we are building our goals, our smarter goals, it's all about team. And if we don't have the right stakeholders involved in the process, we're never going to get to that deep understanding where teachers are seeing outside the doors of their classroom, that they see the whole big picture of where students are before they get to them, while they're in their subject or grade level, and where students are going afterwards. And it's that deep understanding of that entire picture that makes the team work, because then everyone has the right focus and they're moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. And going back to your process, SMART goal about implementing math concepts in every classroom. Well, if a team of teachers that represent every classroom didn't help come up with that goal and aren't going to come up with the way you're going to evaluate and review it, you're probably not going to be as successful with getting that into 100% of classrooms, because we need perspectives from every classroom. Schools can survive with a good leader. They thrive with leaders in every classroom. And we build leaders in every classroom by giving them the opportunity to make decisions about improvement efforts for the campus, and then owning the path and monitoring that path to getting to the destination. Just like probably if I went on your trip to Disney World and I didn't know anything about that trip, I'm probably not going to be that excited about the trip if Disney World's not my thing. But if I'm a part of the process and I know we're going to get to go do this while we're there, I'm probably going to get more excited. I'm going to be more committed to enjoying myself on that trip. The same thing with teachers in your school building. And that's what I was thinking about when you were modeling the smarter process of how would I do this if I was still leading a school and I was leading a school into the 21-22 school year. And I thought about team, but also how can we monitor daily the progress for that E and R? Because when it gets to even 90 days, and definitely by the end of the year, it is postpartum. I mean, it's like it's an autopsy at that point. It's so, but how are we tracking and celebrating every win to even the 90-day cycle? And that's just what I was thinking in my head.
Exactly. Thank you, Matt.
Definitely. Well, when we think about how we're going to uh, implement SMART goals or smarter goals, we have to think about forward momentum. And I'm going to walk us through how do we move your SMART goals forward, your smarter goals with the right team mindset. And this visual is a beautiful visual of how are we going to move everything in the same direction. Before we think about that, I want you to consider this. How does it turn out when we treat everything as important and believe that we will all have, and that all of them will have a positive impact on outcomes for students? What's the outcome of that? And I would suggest not very well. We get nowhere. We are overloaded, moving in multiple directions, training to do everything, trying to implement everything. And this is when we have to actually really be strategic about focusing on the right things, focusing on the right work, and then thinking about what is the effort and the impact that work will have. Many times when we build a plan and we think about our improvement efforts, we just put it on a piece of paper, not really thinking through the actual strategy, how much effort it's going to take to achieve it, and what is the expected impact we think it will have for our students. A tool you can use to help you and your team with thinking through effort and impact for different strategies to achieve smarter goals is this opportunity quadrant map. If you look at the map, there is a vertical axis, which is a measure of the impact or how transformative this could be for your campus. The horizontal axis is a measure of the level of difficulty or effort required to implement. When we look at what we do in each of these four sections, if a strategy ends up in the top left quadrant, meaning that it's little effort with potential for high impact, those are things we manage or do first because they're the easy things that we can see a high return on. If teachers tell me that they need time in the day, well, it's little effort for me to build a schedule with time in the day, and I can do that right away if it's going to have impact for them to collaborate during the day on students. Things that end up in the top right quadrant are a lot of work with high potential impact. That's where we focus and we build a plan. And the bottom left quadrant are things that have little to no impact and don't require much work. So we either delegate those to sub-team or we push back and say we're not going to do that right now. And then finally, the quadrant that we spend too much time in, which are things that take a lot of effort and a lot of time, but don't get any positive results or have high impact. Those are the things we need to drop, avoid. So we started off by saying we, as a business of education, struggle with stopping doing things. And when you think through the work you're doing on your campus through this quadrant map, it'll help you to be able to say, you need to stop doing some things because it requires a lot of work from our team and we're not getting the results for our kids. Let me show you an example of what this could look like. This example school was focused on improving reading outcomes for students. And they mapped out all the ideas that their team brainstormed with potential strategies to improve performance in reading. So you'll see in the top left quadrant, they had reading PD for teachers. That's a low lift with potentially high impact. In the bottom left quadrant, one of the ideas was evening student reading parties. Well, after the team had a conversation about it, they said, well, that's really not that much work, but is there really a high return on that effort? Probably not. In the top right, they said a school-wide reading program in every classroom and then vertical team planning with their feeder pattern. They decided as a team that that is quite a bit of work with potentially large impact. And then the last one was reading incentives for students. So giving students prizes for reading books. And they decided that they didn't think that was that impactful because they weren't teaching kids to be intrinsically motivated on reading and their abilities to read. That's an example of using the quadrant mapping. I'm going to go back to Leslie's smarter goal, and you can see the underlying strategies that this school is going to implement. And then they're going to review and evaluate. So acceleration for all students, an extended school day, personalized acceleration for economically disadvantaged students. So where would these two fall on the map? In my opinion, they would fall in the top right quadrant because they have potentially high impact, but to do personalized acceleration and acceleration during the day is going to require lots of effort, and it's going to require a focused plan. And that is what happens when strategies end up in the top right. We have to spend time developing a thoughtful plan. Leslie mentioned earlier, going through every detail to get to the end. If you backwards map where you want to be and how you're going to get there, that's what campuses that get the results they want, which is high impact for their students, do to achieve those results. It's not by chance. It's by planning and by executing that plan. And when people look and think about success, they think their plan should be very linear, that we start here and we get here. But even when we backwards map and we make that plan, sometimes we have to maneuver and massage and iterate that plan to get to where we want to be. And that's what continuous improvement towards a smarter goal actually is. And in achieving towards that process of success, if I say I want to be a millionaire, I'm probably not going to be a millionaire by just doing one thing. I'm probably going to do many, many things to try to get there. And that's what we call small scale tested change. This is how we reach success through iterative cycles. We focus on these small scale tests of change, which help determine whether an idea could result in substantial improvement. Will this work to make me a millionaire? If not, I need to change what I'm doing or enhance what I'm doing to get there. And those changes should be tested under multiple conditions and with a variety of staff before being implemented. A common name for small scale tests is PDSA, plan, do, study, act. So plan it, just like the top quadrant would tell us on the opportunity map. Do is try out what you plan. Study is observe the results. What are you seeing when you implement? And then act is act on what you learn. If it works, scale it to more students, to more classrooms. If it doesn't get the intended result, how can we iterate it, enhance it, or adapt it to get to the results that we hope to achieve for our kids? And as we think through smarter and plan, do, study, act, the ER that Leslie just introduced us to is really the study and the act. That is where we're evaluating and reviewing and making decisions about how are we going to move this to impact more students towards the ultimate goal of all students improving learning or accelerating in their learning. And here's a visual that just shows what this process may look like. That we start with an idea or a hunch, and we mapped it out in that quadrant map. We realized we needed to have a plan. We implement a small test. We evaluate and review that data, and we do follow-up tests. And once we get results, we start to do a wider scale of that test. And then overall, we start to get to implementation of change where more classrooms are implementing that intervention or strategy, with all of it focused on that ultimate goal, the ultimate smarter goal, like Leslie mentioned, of improving math performance for all students. She mentioned quarterly performance reviews or 90-day goals. And if you think about PDSAs and these 4 PDSAs in this diagram, you can think about it being a quarterly performance review, that we do a PDSA every 90 days. It could be even shorter. But thinking through PDSAs, plan, do, study, act, as a way to really test if you're getting to that end goal, which is the year-long goal, but we're getting there in every 90-day chunk. Going back to our smarter goal again, let's take one of the parts and do a small scale test of change. What if we just focus on extended school days, personalized intensive accelerations, and we do it in just 2 classrooms with 5 economically disadvantaged students in each classroom? How would this look? So instead of saying all classrooms have to do personalized, extended day, intensive acceleration for all of their students or all of their economically disadvantaged students, let's try it in 2 classrooms with 5 students each to see if our strategy actually gets the results we had intended or wanted before we do a full-scale implementation. Thinking through. So when we do the plan, we planned out 2 classrooms, 5 students each. We create a personalized learning pathway with pre and post assessments, and we designate 3 weeks for that test. So we planned out our work with a timeline and the actual work that will be implemented. We implement that test in 2 classrooms with the 5 students. We study by collecting and analyzing pre-post informative data, and we talk to students and get input on the process. Do they feel it's working for them? Do they see value in the process? Do they see that they're getting themselves accelerated on the pathway that they need to be on to be successful? And then we act. We improve based off of the data we've collected, the conversations we've had with teachers and students, and we either made tweaks to that process and scale to a 3rd classroom or a 4th classroom, but we repeat the cycle and make a plan for it. We do it, we study, and we act. And that's living and implementing the smarter process. So Leslie, what resonates with you when you think about that process of the quadrant map, but then also plan, do, study, act?
One thing that really resonates is by doing the quadrant map, it helps create a focus, not only for your plan, but thinking through your personnel, the time that you have, the funds that are available. It just brings all those pieces together. And it helps us let go of some of the things that maybe we don't need to hang on to. Just like that superintendent was telling you earlier, we know that we have to let go of things. And one way we experienced that was when children were sent home in March of 2020, and we had to start the online instruction. There were so many things that we couldn't bring with us. So I think as we're opening schools this fall, we want to be really careful with that and not just go rushing back to our past. We need to make sure that we are looking ahead and that we're designing the schools for our students, what they're going to need in the post-COVID world. So I think that is a great way, that quadrant map is a great way to analyze all the processes and programs and things that we have in place and hopefully eliminate some of those.
Yeah, I agree. And then thinking through those small scale tests of change and going back, if I were still a principal, and how I would do things differently, because we're programmed to just implement full scale and rely on hope and Jesus, right? Like that we're going to get the results because of those 2 things, rather than focused in on a little intervention to see if it actually works before inundating everyone with this extensive effort that we don't even know if it's actually going to get the impact we intended to have. I think that's just a critical new skill that leaders need to start thinking through and start trying in schools, because it will start to get to the results we want, but it'll also help teachers and other staff see that we're being methodical about improvement efforts rather than just a new year, a new thing. And we don't get rid of anything, we just try new things. And it always becomes a new thing versus what we do, and we know it works because we tested it.
Exactly. And by implementing that on a small scale, like you talked about, that also gives your staff opportunities to provide input. Because when we hear about this new shiny thing from another district or a neighboring school, that may or may not work for us. But when you implement small scale, you can create those tweaks that maybe our students need. And that creates more buy-in and ownership when people have the opportunity to think about it before they actually have to walk into it full scale.
Absolutely. You know, you've said it a couple of times. If we move forward with just pulling out the playbook of the past, we're going to get not only the results we got in the past, but worse results because we have a changed society and we're trying to run the same playbook. So really thinking methodically about what is it we're trying to achieve and how we're going to get there is going to be critical to any post COVID shutdown future. So it's something to be really excited about and to think differently about how we lead our schools.
Exactly. Well, Matt, One thing that I like to talk about is a book called Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read that book. It's written by James Clear, but he has a lot of things to say in that book that really go along with what we're talking about here with framing and focusing and moving forward. And this is one of my favorite quotes from him, because he says to move forward, we have to think about the systems that we build. And when you think about all the things that occur at a school, it's really those systems and the processes that we put in place where we have the most impact. We can set a SMART goal, but the purpose of that goal, according to James Clear, is to just win the game. It's to get to the end and accomplish that goal. But that's not what we want in schools. We want to go beyond that. With schools, we want successful systems to continue playing and to continue winning the game. So that's what it means to frame and focus and move forward. So thank you so much to everyone who has attended today. We have enjoyed sharing what we are considering to be the most important work as schools start and open up this fall. If there's anything that Matt or I can do to help your school get started, please don't hesitate to contact us. And thank you again for being here, and I hope you have a great afternoon.